Good evening to all of you. I hope you can hear me, first of all. Is the sound okay? Wonderful. Welcome to the Museum of Arts and Design to a very special evening celebrating the opening of an amazing exhibition called Daniel Brush Blue Steel Gold Light. We're here with Daniel tonight, not for a lecture at all, but for a real conversation. And I have a few questions I wanted to pose to Daniel, but I hope that you will all join in so we get a little bit closer to the end of the hour that we have together. For those of you that have not seen the exhibition, I would recommend using the time afterwards to go immediately to the second floor to have a look at the exhibition and then come back to give yourself even more time to see it. For those of you that have seen it, you are certainly well prepared for the kind of conversation I hope we will have tonight with Daniel, which deals with a body of work that is unique. My name is David McFadden, by the way. I'm the chief curator here at the museum and fortunate enough to be the curator for the exhibition on Daniel Brush. After we finish the conversation here, there will be a book signing in the main lobby of the museum. And the store is remaining open if you'd like to purchase a catalog and then have Daniel sign the catalog for you. But as I say, I want to keep the spirit of this entire event very informal and very comfortable so that we can all converse with each other about this subject. Daniel's work is unique. I've been known Daniel now for almost 14 years. I have never encountered an artist like Daniel. That being said, one of the reasons the work has appealed to me so much is that it defies any kind of categorization. And for us at the Museum of Arts and Design, that's a very important element in what we do. The old hierarchies and boundaries that separated art from craft, the design arts, really are not applicable when you deal with brilliance and talent and expertise. And Daniel's work certainly fulfills all of those qualifications. For those of you that know us, we have done very few one-person exhibitions. We select only those artists who we believe represents the kernel of the mission of the museum, which is to explore this area in which all of the arts, all of the creativity, all of the thought come together in a very seamless manner. And Daniel's work is certainly of that caliber. So welcome to you, first of all, Daniel. And I thought we'd start with some kind of nuts and bolts questions about biography. Could you tell us a little bit about your childhood and going to school and what you've done in the
Sure.
first part of your life?
This one's good? You can hear me? Yeah. Story is like everyone else's story. I'm from Cleveland, Ohio. Went to Cleveland Heights High School, walked to school every day. And my mother and father, they owned a children's clothing store for 45 years. I actually inherited their bankrupt children's clothing store. And it was probably because of my mother. My mother, when she was 13 years old, she won the John Huntington Fellowship in the Arts. It was, I don't know, it must, as the story goes, it must have been in the late 20s or 30s. But she couldn't take it because she had to support her family. She was a secretary from the time she was 13 years old. So I was able to go to the Saturday classes at the Cleveland Museum of Art, which is, if you've never been there, it's an absolutely unbelievable collection. And I went there for years, since I was like 8 or 10 years old, loving to draw the armor. And the armor was, I guess, somewhat visible now in the work you'll see upstairs. I love the steel and the gold. And I like playing with little plastic jousting figures. And at the same time, maybe because of the French Impressionism there, it kind of stuck in my body. And it developed into going to the Cleveland Institute of Art. And because my good friend and fellow Cub Scout up the street, he and I would try to make little molds and things that were part of the badges for being Cub Scouts. He was 1 year older than me, and he went to Carnegie Institute of Technology. because he went. It was the only school I applied to. And I went there. And, and all of a sudden I was in art school. It was, never experienced anything like that before. And the very best thing that happened for me is that I met Olivia. And Olivia and I met in art school, got married day one, and we've been together for 45 years.
And you still call yourself a painter. You still are a painter by
People
choice.
ask, one of the big things, I mean, I don't particularly find it interesting. Other people find it interesting. They'll say, well, how can you do the painting, and how do you do the sculpture, and why do you do jewelry, and all this kind of stuff. I'm a painter. Painting is extremely pressurized and emotional for me. When the referential context in my work was so overwhelming to me, I needed a diversion. And the diversion started when I met Olivia. I bought an ounce of gold for $35, and I made her wedding ring. And it was a perfect diversion. I would be thinking about Beckett or Completely Destroyed by Francis Bacon paintings, and I dreamed about Barnett Newman. And I worried about when he was 50 years old having to move to Brooklyn and be a tailor because Anna Lee, his wife, teaching in public schools in New York, had to support him. I worried about all these things. Therefore, I needed my crossword puzzle. So one thing led to another. 40 years later, I'm still having diversions. So when you go upstairs, or if you've seen it already, if you get off the elevator, what's in front of you, that's where my head is at all the time. And when I can't stand it anymore, it's in that oval, the Tiffany Gallery. What happened, I think, over the years is they almost share equal time now. But I'm still a painter. That's what I'm trying to do. I've been thinking about one work for the past 10 years, but it hasn't torn me apart yet. So what I've been doing mostly are these geometric pieces that you see on the wall cases. I'm terribly interested in the history of jewelry, but I don't really care for jewelry. So I really wanted to do line drawings that were drawn with light. And the only way that I could draw with light was because of the irregularity of mogul rose-cut diamonds. They flicker in a very unusual way. So I've been working on that for the last couple of years.
And in your work, one of the things that has impressed me in looking at the range of the things you do, when you decide to challenge yourself to learn something, it's a very thorough, very grounded process. And even though talking about technique is not interesting, I'm interested to hear you talk about the discipline it takes to learn to do what you need to do to make the work happen.
Well, I am interested in a lot of things. I kind of jokingly think about it like, there's a lot out there. I don't want to miss anything, and I want to make sure that I don't forget. So I store all this information in a file cabinet, and the file cabinet gets kind of overstuffed. You've seen all these things, like overstuffed. The papers are flying everywhere, and then when you least expect it, you knock on the file cabinet, it falls over, and all the stuff falls out. That's sort of, I guess, the way my studio is and the way I think. I get interested. When I was teaching at Georgetown University, I would go have lunch near Dunbarton Oaks, and it was driving me crazy, these beautiful gold things, these granulated things. And when I was 13 years old, my mother took me to Europe to show the world to me, and I stood in the Victoria and Albert Museum looking at this little bowl when I was 13. Absolute knockout thing, and couldn't figure out how it was done. and I really had to know how it was done. So maybe to answer David's question, as I got older and Olivia and I were together, uh, we traveled all over the world searching out any single person that had any remote interest in anything having to do with gold. I went to every major museum anywhere in the world, the Middle East, everywhere. And I went and knocked on the door of fantastic goldsmiths who were then actually in the chain that was handed down from H.P. Littledale's lecture in 32 or 34 in London. He wrote a paper called Colloidal Hard Soldering, which basically talked about how he thought Etruscan work was done. So over the years, I met all the great goldsmiths, and they were all wonderful, but it wasn't the language it wasn't my voice. It wasn't for me the extraordinary insouciance that I saw in a 5th century BC um, granulated work. So to answer your question, there's no mystery. It's it you I I melted 10 years of work because I didn't have enough money to keep working, so all the work was terrible. And I kept thinking and doing and learning. Um, Granulation is an extremely easy process. You can basically understand in 5 minutes. It basically has to do with you're not using solder to join two materials. You're trying to put these like the granules I use are 6 thousandths of an inch to 8 thousandths of an inch. I make every single one of them. If you try to use solder to put that onto a base sheet, there's no definition. It doesn't look like you just took, granules of salt and kind of flicked it on something. So it has to do with raising the melting point of the base sheet and lowering the melting point of the granule to find the eutectic flow point. So you can read about all this stuff. A friend of mine is a Nobel laureate in chemistry. He reads about it. He can't do granulation. He's like locked into the thinking of the chemistry. So I think you have to move beyond the chemistry, beyond the actuality of making it. What I found ultimately was I had to let loose. My work was student level, which was looked good, felt good, but it wasn't as good as Etruscan work. So I felt that I had to understand what a little girl in Etruria was about. And I felt that they were having fun and they were giggling and they had this kind of lightness of being and spirit. It wasn't that, I'm a goldsmith, look what I can do. It was, I'm kind of thinking and working with something and letting it tell me what it wanted to be. When I no longer worried that the piece took 1,000 hours and could be destroyed in 1 second with a torch, I had no fear anymore. I obviated fear. So
that element of risk is really important because everything you do has such an incredible vision behind it.
Well, it was interesting. In the jewelry business, there are extraordinary workshops, and in Paris, this one man, great workshop, makes fantastic things. He said he saw something I made, and he says, it was something like Daniel, beautiful, whatever. He says, I can't make what you're making. And I said, of course you can make it. You know everything about it. And he said, no. He said his business would not allow what I would allow, jeopardy. He had no room for jeopardy and risk because it was a linear procedure. Workman, time, had to make product.
Correct.
I get up in the morning, I want to learn. If there's no product at the end of the day, it's fine. Don't care.
And you work directly with your materials. You don't plot and plan anything in advance.
Well, I study. I get worried. I think. There are no working drawings.
Right.
There's just materials. If there's, I jokingly say this, it's facetious. If it's the Jean-Luc Godard statement, if you think I'm so great, leave $20 on the table. So, a few people they left $20 on the table and they took care of my work. Next day, it's all spent.
Right.
It's like go buy the ounce of gold, go buy 1,000 sheets of paper, because I wanted it around me so I could, I want to know that it's telling me to do something, to work. Um,
I think you're
yeah.
part of a group of unusual artists, however, who I remember someone saying to me several years ago when we were talking about his work. He happened to be a furniture maker, and he said it's profoundly important to me that my craftsmanship become transparent
Yeah.
because I don't want people to stop at that point and have craftsmanship be so opaque they can't see what the work is about.
Yeah, it goes to the idea of virtuosity. I mean, I kind of grappled with this and thought about it for a long time. Olivia, 20 years ago, she said, "Oh, this sounds interesting. Let's go see this." And it was at the Japan Society in New York. There, it was the perfect thing for me. I loved it, even like the little blurb about it. Blind bard from Northeast Japan will play the shamisen. Love that. So, we go to the Japan Society, he walks out, escorted. There he was, Chico-san, and traditional robes, sat down, played the thing. After an intermission, his protege came out, wonderful young woman, and she was just all over the place, fantastic skill. She was a virtuoso. At some point, Chico's son's instrument played, and I could, whether it's a romantic vision I have or not, he sat there, and it just passed right through him. So this is about the transparency you're talking about.
Well, I think that the other comment that was made by another artist was that if for this person good enough is not good enough, and that means that you've set such incredibly high standards for yourself that people really have to take the time to see what you're about, to see what the work is about. And I've told people who visit the show, it's not an exhibition that has theatrics to it. It's
No.
not about shouting at you, look at me, look at this. You have to allow yourself to become a part of that experience of the work. And for you, when you see this happen in people, when you understand that people really get what you're about, does that provide the kind of satisfaction I assume it must, where you've made some kind of a relationship with the viewer?
Yeah. What I keep thinking is that, I show the work very rarely. Um, if someone stops for a second, that's amazing to begin with. Our lives don't allow that. Somebody stops for a second, and then they keep chewing on the experience. And if they keep looking and looking, and it kind of roosts in their mind, they're making the work. And, I help maybe the process, but I can then go away. I've been trying to divest myself of ego for 45 years. The only thing you wouldn't let me do is take my name off the second floor. But I like the idea that if you look and look and look, you are creating it. You are having a dialogue with the piece. And if it roosts around enough that it kind of infects you, it'll then maybe lead to another direction of study. I can't possibly think in any real terms that somebody can get off the elevator and know what was on my mind when they look at the aluminum, two-part piece. I can hardly grapple with it. What you're ultimately looking at is this aluminum hand-engraved thing. It's bifurcating because of the light. But what I really see in it is the dream I had about Beckett listening to Billy Whitelaw try to perform, his play, not eyes, play for the mouth. And I could only imagine, he's watching it. It's a blackened theater. He only sees the mouth when the light. It's perfect. It's perfect. It's perfect. And she misses a word, and he goes, "Ah!" and total desperation. Oh, and I couldn't get this out of my mind for years. Um, how do you? So what's the track I can leave about it? I don't know. It turned into this aluminum thing I engraved. Can you possibly know what I went through? No. But what you can possibly get is maybe you stand there yourself and you feel something. If you can feel yourself in it and maybe a little bit of me in it, it takes you to another place. Mm-hmm. So to answer you, do I get companionship? Yeah, I was upstairs today. I mean, it's really it's so touching, frankly. Somebody came up to me and said, "Thank you for doing the show." And I thought, if I could have helped them a little bit, pleasure. Thank you. I'm glad I got an email last night. I've been getting hundreds of emails. This woman wrote me like this big tome. It was incredible. And she on and on, very well written, very well educated. And at the end, she puts her name on it. Like everybody else, I was like, immediately to Google, who's this person? So, I mean, I don't think I told you this. It was so fascinating. So, like, oh my God, one of the major labor lawyers in New York City. And I thought, well, you probably on the way home, you forgot having your, like your single malt or your martini, stopped at the museum, saw something, but she saw enough to have her warm hand touch my warm hand. Mm-hmm. I think that's an amazing experience, really. Definitely. And I appreciate it.
You brought up something interesting when you talked about AO, and this is something that I think is also unique in the way that you work, and that is the way you title your works.
Yeah.
And I'd like to ask a little bit about that, because some of the titles you give to a series are very mysterious to the viewer. You have to ponder quite a long time. You may not know the same information that you know when you're making it. Yeah. How do titles come about?
Well, for me it wasn't, I'm in the studio using materials and then worrying about it as a catalog, and I'm like, some other artist just saying it's number 1 or 2 or 3. It always, what always happens is that I get irritated about something enough to think about it, or travel to, learn more, and then study, and it's like, it's almost, fermenting for years. And I've had a lot of poets come through the studio. I tend to read poetry all the time, and I like the solitude of it. And one of my closest friends, she's now 43, I've known her since she's 3, she's a poet, and it's I find that the referential context, the room that's created with writing is very meaningful to me. I tend to think that all the linear work that you see in the gallery, the drawings, paintings, the engraved lines, these are really written pages in my in my journal. And of course it's my language. All the work, if you don't know, it's either written with my grandfather's ruling pen or with an engraving burin in my hand, line by line, top to bottom. The aluminum ones were done top to bottom, left side with my right hand, and then top to bottom, right side with my left hand, alternating as I went through the page.
I think it comes across in the exhibition too, this interest in the word as not an object in itself, but as a keystone to understanding something. And when you look at your jewelry in the Tiffany Gallery, in that incredible line of steel and diamonds, it does take on the appearance of a strange calligraphy that we haven't translated yet.
Yes.
And when you choose a title for a work, does the title precede the work? Is that the stimulus for making the work?
It does.
Okay.
in all instances. Um, in one of the books upstairs, I don't remember, which one, I listed all the titles for the last, since 1973. And if the work was never seen, the work I did was that list of, I think at this point it's 108 titles. And the 108 titles ultimately, you know, the record that's left are all these pages and paintings, but the real work was the entire package that happened from that title. I'll tell you, the painting up there is entitled Cold 101, Cold Koald. My student at Georgetown University, James Hall, in 1973, wrote a poem about me. He was 18, 19 years old, and the poem had something to do with, a room without walls. And he entitled this poem Cold, Koald. I can still see him. In fact, I did a painting called The Scrupulously Delicate Smile of Jim. Um, um, every single work I had done in all the years was numbered then. It was cold numbers. So the painting upstairs is Cold 101 in the character of the speaker. In the character of the speaker, here's what I'll give you a little thing about what that's about. I've never seen a no theater performance. I want to see it in the 14th century, so it makes it a little difficult. So I kind of dream about it. So I've read all the transliterations that I could find. There are 6 columns in the no theater. One of them is called the Tsure column. It's the column for an accompanying actor. When you're about 35 years old and you've reached maybe the 7th level of the no theater, which is described as the art of the flower of stillness, snow piled high in a silver bowl. The 35-year-old actor walks out in full, I'm interested in the women plays, one of the 5, full women, the woman's dress, female mask, and only stands next to the Tsure column, the accompanying role. But at some point, the viewer should know that that character and that actor would blossom into a full-blown peony. It was in the character of the speaker. I spent 5 years making these paintings. I did 83 of them. That's number 14 upstairs.
The other concept that keeps reappearing in your work a lot is the idea of the breath.
Yeah.
And you see it referred to in some titles. It's implied by the pieces. Talk to me a little bit about what breathing means in your life.
Yeah. Yeah. I talked a little bit about, if you listen to the audio tape, I talked a little bit about it as well. Okay. When I got involved with ornamental turning, you can see some mastodon ivory pieces upstairs. Has little facets and nicks, things like that all over it. I couldn't figure out how it was done. So all the research, whatever, it led to my study of French king hobbies and John Jacob Holtzapfel and Charles Holtzapfel and the hobby of amateurs before the automobile took them outside of their, castles and fancy residences. These are very complex milling machines and lathes, foot and hand operated. A gazillion controls and index heads and all sorts of stuff. But no matter what you do, and you read all the papers, you figure it all out mathematically, you turn all the stuff, on the finished piece, it will show a breath change. You could be leaning on the tool, you could isolate it from the earth's vibration by shock absorbers, thick cement floors, But no matter what, if you turn the handle the wrong way, like in fact, John Jacob Holtzapfel talks about removing the nervous energy of the operator to find an equanimity of spirit with this lever to which is called the elastic arm of the operator. So I had all this in my mind for a while, and when I'm painting at the same time, the actual process. My grandfather was a draftsman for Curtiss Wright airplanes. I inherited his drafting set. So there's that old-fashioned, there's the leaf pen with a little screw. You dip it in one drop. You decide, you place, and you scribe a line. So after about 10 or 15 years of the ornamental turnery and the painting, it dawned on me that I was taking a breath, engaging, doing the work, thinking, and exhaling at the end of each pass, whether it was on the painting or on ornamental turning. And what I didn't realize is that I was engaging with the Hamsa breath. Mm-hmm. The Hamsa breath is not a Buddhist mantra, but Buddha did practice this for his 6 years in exile. It's described as the two wings of the swan. The inhalation is one wing, and if it engages with your mind and then lets it pass through you, the exhalation is the other wing of the swan. The two wings of the swan are called the divine soul. It's become the way I work and the way I think.
I think part of the experience, though, too, I remember seeing one of your works from the Thinking of Monet series on the wall, and myself taking a breath in and having to almost remind myself to breathe out, because there's a quality to the work that literally stops activity while you're perceiving it. And that kind of emotional quality, I think, is really profoundly important. It's what you have done as an artist for the viewer. It's really a gift to the viewer to ask them to take that time to experience it.
Olivia and I live a very removed existence. We're working all the time. Then you get this opportunity to say, here's what I've been working on. If somebody can feel that I'm really there, on the work, in the work, it's what I hope for. But nothing more. And it goes back to the transparency thing you're talking about. I want it to become transparent so that it becomes a good experience that you can't maybe hold on to. I can't hold on to it. I have absolutely no idea what's going to happen tomorrow. I'm going to be working. I don't know what I'm going to. If I don't like the idea that, I did this, I'm going to do it again, and I'm going to refine it. It may turn out to be, but I try to get up in the morning, and I have a fairly ritualistic way of grappling with the next day. I get up, I sweep 5,000 feet of red maple floor in my studio every single day for hours. I've tried to do it all the time, but other stuff crops up in my mind. So, I sweep the floor, watch the light change, and I see the thousands of pounds of steel, ounces of gold. I tend to throw diamonds and rubies around just so I can look at them and not worry about value. And it could be some little thing Olivia says to me that starts the day, and I'm lost until 4 in the morning. Every day, it's the exact. It's I've looked down and 40 years passed. It's very strange. You've been there.
Oh, absolutely.
There,
And
somebody was in my studio not long ago. It was so interesting to me. I never heard it. I never think like this. The person said, they looked around and said, "Oh, here's all the stacks of stuff and the rolls of painting. The paintings look like carpets from a bazaar in the Middle East someplace. It's just all rolled up." And they said, "Don't you want to, get a capital return on your investment?" I said, "What are you talking about?" I couldn't. I didn't know what he's talking about. And he said, "Well, you got all this work. They haven't seen it." I said, "No. This is not inventory.
Right.
These were pages in the diary, the journal." And
Right.
and it sort of let me get to the next page. And that's the only way I've ever thought about it.
I'm going to step back one little bit because you said a couple of things that I think are extremely important in understanding what the work is about. You mentioned that you don't know what you're going to be tomorrow, that things change very quickly, and then you mentioned watching in the morning while you're sleeping, the changing nature of light.
Yeah.
When someone asked me 2 days ago, what are the materials he works in? I said there's steel and there's gold and there may be diamonds, but there's light. And light is the other material that's really in your arsenal of things that you are able to manipulate and also to play with in a very interesting way.
Well, like the thinking about Monet, these are the stainless steel ones in, the area close to Time Warner back in there. I was making what I thought was a page in a book. I was engraving this piece. I was thinking about William Carlos Williams. And the light in the studio hit it, and all this color started shooting out, which was disconcerting. And, it immediately made me think about all the years in Cleveland looking at the Monet paintings. Olivia and I had been all over, we went to Rouen and Giverny and all this kind of stuff. I always like Monet paintings, but I don't like oil paint pigment. And I had seen Monet paintings with big transparencies and hold them up 8x10s. Unbelievable. There's like light shining right through it, incredible luminosity. And the first thing I thought about when I saw it coming off this engraving I was doing was it was French light, French color. And I tried to understand why it was happening, and what ultimately was happening was there were so many engraved lines. It was a diffraction line grading. It was breaking the beam of light the way a prism in 10th grade science class does. And it finally, I kept thinking about trying to paint with luminosity. I can't control it. I can't say, well, I'm going to make this little area in cerulean blue and this area in something else. But I can sort of come close to it.
I think it's the perfect marriage of painting and sculpture because you have both elements mixed, again, seamlessly in that work.
Well, the thing about, I was tell you, how much I couldn't stand oil paint. The painting upstairs is an oil painting. But 30 years ago, I bought all this paint. I was flush. I went down to propane. I just globs of paint. But it was very difficult for me to think about, well, today the paint's going to be pink or red or blue. And that was too emotionally impossible. I just took all the paint, squeezed it all out, big giant container. There's the Damar varnish, the turpentine. I stirred it up once. And for all the years, whatever migrated to the top surface, I took one little spoon, scooped it off. That was what that day's painting was going to be. So when the tablet was when I was working on it, I saw color that I was really looking for over 35 years. It was luminous color, and I was trying to paint with the light beams.
And because that effect happens, what you know in your mind is a solid piece of steel actually becomes a transparent window because you're really just looking at the light. I'm going to come back to another aspect of light because it's one of the stories that I like so very much. Talk about Gala Placidia and the origin of that piece.
Well, one of the first backpack trips to Europe, Olivia and I, art school, we read the books. H.W. Jansen, you probably all had the books. He was a good friend of mine. And we talked, here's the book. I got to talk to the writer of the book, and he was like, go see this, go see that. So, so it was our mission to see Galla Placidia's tomb in Ravenna. And, oh God, it just really knocked me out. And we're in there, and all this, the flickering tessera were just, it just lit up the building and the space. I didn't have to worry any longer about Galla Placidia, Theodora, Justinian. All I was there was being taken over by the light. And it picked up, later when we were in Florence, 5 o'clock, the city was glowing, absolutely glowing, because the ambient light was being reflected against the gold leaf domes. And it finally dawned on me that, all the years that I had been pushing and pulling and making gold and granulation, all this kind of stuff, it really wasn't where I wanted to be. I wanted to somehow see if gold on the sculptures could pick up this ambient light.
Well, it certainly does, and in that particular piece, when you go up to the gallery, or if you've already seen it, it has gold in the front. You see this incredible passage of gold that has an incredible texture, and because the gold is also on the reverse of the piece, you get this amazing glow on the wall, as if there's light coming from behind the piece. And what this does, in my mind, is, in the steel piece is the same thing. It turns something that you know is heavy into something that's weightless because it's floating there. So I like this idea of the way you juxtapose different perceptions and different understandings. And again, it's something that you have to give the work time to do.
Yeah, the installation gave us the opportunity to try to do this. I had always wanted to hang a piece behind a door and have it be so quiet that you could hear it's quiet. So, Matthew, Dorothy, Olivia, you, everybody, we kind of felt, let's stick that over in the corner, the gold piece, and see if it could, be quiet in its flickering light. And if the light was quiet enough, it could maybe make you stand there for a little bit.
I think it's a magical experience, and I think that, speaking from the point of view of someone who's looked at a range of your work too, it is always this quality of the moment in time which is captured by those pieces, because like you said about your own self, a split second later, the light's going to be different.
Yeah.
That piece is now a different piece.
The photographers were never successful in the studio.
Absolutely
I
not.
found it, it was so interesting to me. I'm an absolutely terrible photographer. I can't even take a snapshot with a point and shoot. I'm terrible at it. And, all these photographers, some of them pretty famous at the studio, we all saw color on the piece, but nobody could they captured the metal. They enhanced some of these pictures with, Photoshop and other ways of doing it. And I kept saying to them, I see it with my eyes, take the picture. And they said, cameras don't work like your eyes. And by the time they got their eyes accustomed to doing this kind of stuff, the light changed, and it became February and March, and then it became June, and June light's different than February light, and like morning lights. So it was incredibly interesting. It's too much to ask, but I see it in the studio all the time. But, if a visitor to the museum could take the time and stay there from 11 to 5 looking at the piece, it's a different experience.
Definitely.
Because it's different as the light flickers, as the weather changes, as the seasons change, because the refraction off the pieces will change. Very much like if you're traveling and you're looking and take pictures of anything else. I want that to be part of it. There's a whole series of work that's actually not in the exhibit, and I'm kind of, they were all done in copper, and the copper has an incredibly beautiful, strangely humanistic reddish color. It's kind of like engaging to me, and it's uncoated, and I want the work to totally disintegrate in time, where the verdigris takes over and the pieces turn from that beautiful, seductive, and sensual color to being a kind of granular green, oxide.
Right.
Um,
Like a shown bronze. I mean, that's
exactly.
incredible
Yeah.
texture.
Yeah.
Daniel, if you're willing, I would like to ask if there are members of the audience who would like to raise a question.
Yeah, ask me whatever. I'll tell you. I mean, it's like I won't do this. I won't put you on the spot. But the last course I taught at Georgetown University was the relationship of structure to meaning, and I actually graded all my students on the questions they asked, not on the activity. So, not to put you on the spot, if you have a question, just I might not answer it, but
But please do raise it.
yeah, I'll do my best.
Anyone out there?
You're afraid?
Yes,
Okay,
right in
go
the front
ahead.
row. Perfect.
So I was really interested in what when you began to talk a little bit about your hobbies, and how that
Oh, you wanna know about
is.
my
I
hobbies?
want to know a little bit more about your hobbies.
Okay.
Yeah.
Olivia sort of hits me in the head every once in a while with a frying pan about it, but I'm an insatiable, collector, and it tends to go towards, I don't know, certain kinds of areas. I'm absolutely out of my mind for tools, old tools, antique tools, because I like to know that somebody used them, and I keep thinking that if I have them near me, it'll rub off on me. The patina, their work, whatever it was in their hands. Maybe I'll learn from holding it. So I mean, is that a romantic thing? Maybe not. I don't know. So I endless quantities everywhere. 40 years ago, I was, I couldn't afford an old jalopy when I was in college. So as time went on, I got a little, more. I always loved automobiles and the design of them and the mechanics of them, but I couldn't. I just never had the time to learn anything. So I met this mechanic like 45 years ago, who had the grace to accept me into the club of, here's the image. It's like the rolled up T-shirt with the Chesterfields. It's the cigarette, and he's saying, "Just see the hottie over there." So it's like, for 40 years I've learned. I built 38 race cars because I was so fascinated with it, and some of them were because they're no longer around. I had the best Hudson Hornet existing. Because I love the idea that it was no longer an auto. Every single time you get into a car, a taxi in New York, and you have to you open the door, you step over this. The Hudson was a step down. It was because of them, the step down monocoque structure of a Hudson. But I guess it was 1956, they were out of business because they couldn't change their body to feed the style needs of people wanting something new all the time. I recently got involved with this recently, being in the last 15 years. He was this remarkable, crazy guy up in New England. And he was very successful in business, and he wanted to race cars in the late 50s. But he couldn't find anything that he liked. So he drew a little napkin thing, this chassis, and had a builder in London make it, Trevor Wilkinson. And I was so interested after meeting this man. I searched and searched and searched, and I finally found the car he actually drew in 1957. It was totally derelict. It was named after his daughter and son, Joanna and Mark, called it Jomar. There are only 26 of them. I have 5 of them. But it's all because of this man, who I thought was terribly interesting. I read about not long ago, I thought, what? I never heard about this. It was like a little ad somewhere, and it said, Taino vomit sticks. And I know, what was that? And like I did all this research. It's very hard to do research about it because there was only one exhibition ever done. There was a book. It was at the Museo del Barrio, maybe about 10, 15 years ago. So I decided, oh, that was interesting. So Olivia and I, we went and I bought every single lot in the auction. So I have the largest collection in the world of Taino vomit sticks.
Vomit sticks, right.
And I'm trying to somehow get some research done about this and have an exhibit about it because it basically is New World discovery, the area of Puerto Rico.
Right.
The people were taking hallucinogens. They wanted to cleanse their being, to have a close relationship with their spiritual requirements. So they went with the,
right.
But they're fantastically beautiful carvings in bone and ivory. So I mean, that's part of it. I mean, I like I'm wearing I always wanted to make my own boots, but I just didn't have time to figure out how to do it. So, but I've been really friendly with this fellow in Austin now. I talk to him all the time. I call him up all the time. Maybe if I have him make a few boots for me, he'll tell me enough about lemon pegs and the lasts and the thing, and I can go out and buy some leather and try to do it. But so I've gotten very focused on, boots from like 1850 to the present. So I mean, it's like endless. I mean, my son covers government regulations for derivative trading. So I didn't want to sound completely stupid in front of him. I've been buying as many books as I could possibly buy, not on current things, but on the history of financial trading for the past 100 years. So I've been getting books, some fantastic, beautiful old leather-bound books, trying to understand what that's all about. So
I love the fact that there are always these surprises in you, and one of the surprises in working with Daniel is realizing the incredible sense of humor that you've had, because the work is beautiful and magnificent and ponderous and thoughtful, and then there's this other side of you. And why don't you talk about what was the origin of the Menagerie Magnétique? All of the animals which you've seen,
it's kind of
the multicolored animals.
What I found so interesting is when were those from? 2005, 2005. Somebody had shown me this fantastic Bakelite jewel. It was so ugly. It was done by Coco Chanel. I couldn't stand it. It was awful. And the reality is, Bakelite was, then I thought, okay, it's plastic. It was kind of interesting. It was studded with all sorts of stuff. So I didn't know anything about it. So George Bakel in 1932, it was an insulator, GE electric tubes, all that kind of stuff. And it only came in brown, so no matter what anybody tells you, and you're at the flea markets and you're buying the bracelets for whatever, they're not Bakelite. They're osmiroid, casein. Bakelite was that brown, ucky stuff. Mm-hmm. And so I got interested in all that, and then the Bakelite, the osmiroid casein thing, it went down because the stuff had formaldehyde in it and all the workers died. But I was interested in it all, and I kept thinking that I have a lot of I won't go so far as to say friends, but I've met a lot of people, and I do feel privileged about it because I had some entree into studying the things that are in the highest end of the jewel business. And though I think many things are very beautiful, I kept thinking about the high and low aspects of what this was all about. And Olivia and I were taken out to one of the very fancy restaurants in New York. And, I just had the feeling that I was in another time. I mean, the people were coming in and they were looking at us, and they were decked out in jewels after the opera and all that. And I thought, it was too serious of what I was seeing, and I kept thinking I had to get involved with high and low. So my son ate animal crackers. I thought about Coco Chanel's. So for fun, I made each one of them an animal, and I studied it with real diamonds. Mm-hmm. And they thought it was funny as anything. I thought it was funny. And then, what I found was people, a few people that saw it said, how can you do that? Like, that's not serious. It's getting in the way of like serious work. And I thought, all work's serious. Right. I get up in the morning, eat Cheerios, and I'm worried about whether the spoon's in the right direction. Right. So I tend to think of everything as serious. So, I got so wrapped into these animals that I was making them. Like, I'll tell you how serious I thought it was. I mean, like, upstairs, there's like a skunk hiding under, like Dorothy, she's sitting right there. She says, oh, it'd be so funny, let's hide it under there, it stinks. Well, the actuality is there was it was the biggest diamond show ever done in history in London, maybe about 5-6 years ago or longer. I didn't like the premise of the show. It was a little, for me, too much sponsored by the commercial industry. So I thank you. I'm glad you asked me to be part of the show. That was one of the only times I made something for a specific instance. I made a skunk to tell him I thought the show stunk. But
That's great.
But I mean, they were made for fun.
Yeah,
and then,
great.
Every once in a while, Olivia would wear one of these things just, for
Right.
fun, And then a couple people wanted to take care of animals. I thought, how nuts is that?
Right.
It's like a zoo.
But you even made a Cartier leopard.
Well, my very closest friend, he would be sitting here if he was still around. My very closest friend started the Cartier Museum. His name is Eric Nuspa. Very sensitive, very smart, very elegant man. His job was, he worked for Cartier, and he traveled around the world looking for their historical pieces to form a museum, and then using those pieces to put on exhibitions for the House of Cartier. And as much as I loved Eric, I thought he was sometimes a little too wrapped up. So, I made the cat on the branch. It's up in the show. And when I was done, I went and knocked on the window on Fifth Avenue. The guards come down. I said, I want to see Mr. Nussbaum. I took it upstairs, just go, nah, 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 nah. And I thought it was so funny.
That's
and
great.
That's ultimately why I made it.
Super.
Just so that he could laugh about it.
That's great. That's great.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Sure.
Yes, over in the corner.
Could you please describe the broom that you use each day to sweep your studio that gives you the inspiration of what you might do next?
Yeah, I made it. It's I got a long piece of birch. I kind of tried to fashion it the old-fashioned way with. I'm terrible at wood because I don't like the dust. I don't like that it moves around a lot. I can't stand it. So I really, but I scraped. It started out because when we moved, it's a Stanford White building, historical loft. I got it by chance, Village Voice, Wednesday morning, Woody Allen story, putting up the sign, saw the guy, had to have it, waited 2 years till I could even move in. I put $100 down. So they're soaked in oil, machinery, it was a sweatshop. So I kept thinking about, I think it was Bruegel paintings. I didn't want somebody to come in there with a power sander and perfect. So I sharpened a piece of metal for me and Olivia, and on hands and knees we scraped each board linearly. So you get this wavy, you see it, it's kind of beautiful.
Absolutely.
So then it was the issue of how do I take care of it? So I thought, I did some research about you don't put water, don't use the soap and all that stuff. So I made a formula that I would made a little atom, it's like the old perfume thing with the quick. So I would squirt, but then I had to figure out how to get the dust is an abrasive. It hurts the wood and all that. So I had to figure out a way to sweep it linearly. So, I went out and got some birch from a friend of mine's land, made it smoke shave, and then I did some research about bristles and hair and all that, and I cut, tied, twisted, implanted the whole bit. So it's the same one for 33 years, but it's holding up.
It hasn't worn down yet to a nub.
No.
Right, that's great. Anyone else? Yes, another question over here.
I don't know if that answers it, but
I have the feeling you must have some very dynamic conversations with your materials.
well,
And if I'm right, I'd love to know an example of a negotiation with your materials.
well, you know, I don't, I mentioned before, they all have a particular personality. The gold I use start because I don't know, for all, anybody can't go buy gold. You can buy a coin or a Krugerrand or whatever, but because of friends and the business, I can buy from an assay company. But I buy it to my specification in purity, 9 levels of purity, 0.99s pure. So when I see these beautiful granules in my hand, I kind of want to respect them in the way Olivia makes chocolate chip cookies. I want to make sure that if I'm going to interact with it, it will also be pure. Like, for instance, if you wanted to do granulation or gold work, and you went out and bought 18 karat gold, it most likely was made by a commercial manufacturer. It could have all sorts of things in it for commercial reasons that make them harder or softer. It could have magnesium, zinc, all sorts of weird stuff in it. I tend not to like the weird stuff. I like the pure stuff. It's like organic gold alloying. So I went out and I from different sources had the same level of silver and copper refined for me, and then with very, very precision scales, like the best one can come by, I would very carefully make my chocolate chip cookies. And I wanted a sense of it to be clean. There's a piece upstairs, it's like a little bowl form, and it's got beetles all over it. Every one of those beetles is a different alloy of gold, whether they be blue or green or whatever, because I thought it was interesting to see how gold could be changed in certain ways.
It's also the painter talking again.
Yeah, so I mean, there are over 5,200 varieties of steel. You can't buy all of them. Some of them are for aerospace quality and government contract. I was so fortunate. 30 years ago, somebody had seen my work, and he was one of these remarkably valued people. He was so valued, he didn't have to go to the armed services because he was so valuable to stay back here and work as a precision tool maker. And I would visit him from time to time. And every once in a while, he would give me a little piece of government contracted, steel. And I take it back, and I call him up immediately, like on the phone, like, Walter, what is this? And he was like so gentle, he'd like laugh hysterically, and things would happen, and it would speak, speak to me in some way I'd never seen before. And I said, I love this, I gotta have it. He says, Daniel, this is part of the space shuttle. You can't have that. But I've seen some things that are really quite extraordinary. There's a man that has come to my studio for years and years and years. He was actually brought. It's funny in the article. I never saw this phrase before. It was like, as they say, one of the bold-faced names out there. So, I have the great privilege to have been able to talk personally with Dr. Oliver Sacks. Dr. Oliver Sacks brought one time a Nobel laureate to the studio. It was great. The man invented tungsten carbide. So about the 30th visit to the studio, I said, "What are you working on?" And he said, "Well, I just invented the hardest substance ever made, that was ever done." I said, "How cool is that?" And I said, "Can I see it?" He says, "Well, we can't make it. We can only prove it with quantum mechanics." Now, I love the purity and the beauty of that.
Right.
I wish I could see it as he sees it, but I don't know quantum mechanics on his level.
One more question, and then we'll give you some time to go see the exhibition. Yes, in the back center.
Is there any work that you've or any kind of focus that you've developed past and not been able to develop a lot of work on, like some kind of subject that's captured your interest, but then you've moved on, and that you kind of are sad that you didn't really get to focus on that?
Well, I've never said. It's like, we're talking. I tend to not go in a forward linear path. I tend to see myself as in these endless spirals of confusion, and sometimes it's faster than not. I kind of whips around, but I'm going to get to all of it, but but I get diverted. I don't allot time. I'll get up and maybe 9 years passed, and I was working on one drawing. There was one book. There's a book upstairs, not in the exhibit. It's a thin little book. It's called Red Breathing Cantos for the Women Plays. It's the only documentation of one work that I did of 117 drawings. I worked on it for 13 years. So am I sad that I missed anything? Nah, yeah, I'll get to it. And I haven't forgotten. It's just I'm busy.
That's a great place to end. I want to give you time. Thank you, Daniel.